Welcome back. Scott Sambucci here. It is time for yet another episode of the Go Farther series here on the Start Selling Podcast. Scott Sambucci here at the controls. It is Monday morning, 5:13 a.m., and I am pretty pumped up for the week ahead. I'm pumped up for the week ahead because, number one, this podcast, I spent some time yesterday afternoon planning this out, thinking about content, and it's just really nice to be able to walk in the office first thing in the morning and have all my notes ready to rock and roll. Number two, just got one of those weeks ahead that I'm excited about. Lots of meetings, lots of calls, work with clients, different events. And then next week is spring break. So taking a couple days off with the family to head up to Mammoth Mountain and do some skiing. So it's one of those weeks where I know I'm going to get a lot done ahead of a nice little break that we're all looking to do as a family. So let's dig into today's episode. Let's talk about today's topic, which is resilience. Resilience. Be resilient. So there's a couple things here I want to add before I dive into this topic, as I guess a little bit of a disclaimer or a caveat, if you will. So the concept of resilience is a really important psychological term. There's some excellent research out there. I've read some of it actually, some academic journal articles and other research from psychologists. And when we're talking about resilience today and in the confines of this podcast, I want to be clear that the resilience that we're going to talk about here is business resilience or kind of personal resilience at the layer in which all of us, that if you're in a position in your life that you can take time to listen to this podcast, frankly and honestly, I think we can all say that we're in a privileged situation. I mean, for me individually, growing up, I've had every single advantage ever given to me. Grew up in middle class America. My parents are happy and married now over 50 years. Never had to worry about where a meal was coming from. Never had to worry about financial insecurity. Never had situations where I was physically or mentally abused. Certainly haven't had to deal with things like, F-16s flying over my head, which is happening in parts of the world, and other kinds of issues like that. So those levels of resilience that people have built through going through such horrible experiences throughout their life is very, very different than the kind of resilience we're going to talk about here. I'm simply keeping this at the layer of, like, how do we build resilience? How do we be resilient from a business sense and from a personal sense on a day-to-day basis? So I don't want to pretend that I've gone through any kind of, any significant trauma in my life that avails me to any level of expertise beyond just my personal experiences in business and life, and layering in some of my experiences doing some of the endurance racing. So I just want to be clear about that going in. I'm absolutely not an expert aside from personal experience in business and sort of like first world problem life that I've had. So that's number one. Number two, I also, to quickly change gears, with this podcast, I absolutely want you to engage with me. And the way I want you to engage with me is, number one, I would really appreciate it if you don't already follow the show on your podcast player, just click follow. So maybe this particular episode or other episodes have been forwarded to you, or maybe you saw this on LinkedIn or something like that. If you would follow the show, that absolutely helps us, number one, get jazzed about the content that I'm producing here. Number two, if you would share it with a friend, maybe this podcast came to you through a friend sharing it, or maybe you saw this on LinkedIn. So please do continue that sharing. And number three, if you're listening to this on a podcast player, or you just heard about it on LinkedIn or other places, I would absolutely appreciate it if you could leave us a review, especially on those podcast players. The reason that's so important is not for personal ego by any stretch. It's because I want this message to get out to as many people as possible. And when you like or subscribe or follow, leave reviews, leave comments on the podcast players, it actually helps the podcast algorithm, those podcast players like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. The more reviews and recommendations and follows that the podcast players see, the more likely it is that they'll recommend this show to other people like you, so that other folks can find this show organically because the podcast players have recommended to them. So I really, really appreciate it if you do those things for me. And then secondly, I've got something coming up next week. I'm going to announce it a little bit more robustly, but specifically, I've got a little something that I think you're going to like. And the short of it is, it's what I'm calling the Go Farther Workbook, the Go Farther Workbook. So I've been organizing a form of a journal and a workbook that I want to make available to everybody, totally free, no charge. to get the electronic copy of it. It's like 97% done right now. It's not 100% done, so I'm not ready to yet hand it out and get it out to you, but it will be done in the next couple of days, probably by next episode. So the easiest way for you to kind of get a jump start on this, so I know where to send it, is if on LinkedIn, especially if you follow me on LinkedIn, just send me a DM that says go farther. Or if you're not connected to me on LinkedIn, send me a connection request. And all you have to do in the connection request is personalize it and just say go farther. And that will let me know that you've heard about me and the podcast through this type of episode. And then once we have the workbook ready to release, I'll send you out a link where you can download a copy of it. Okay. So those are the two things, just a little teaser of things coming up. So let's dig in. Let's talk about resilience. Be resilient. So first of all, why is this important? Well, like we've talked about over the last couple of episodes, once you get moving, once you get working, once you start, moving along that path on some kind of idea, and you're focusing and you're getting to work and you're doing hard things, well, you're going to hit obstacles. And a lot of times those obstacles, even if they're expected, or even if we've prepared for the unexpected obstacles, many times those obstacles are more frequent than we think or bigger than we expected. And any kind of work that we're doing that's hard work, we get tired, we get frustrated, we get fatigued. And every time we're going to new heights, I think sometimes for me anyway, I kind of get some doubts in my mind. Like, how am I actually going to get farther than I was before? How do I get, to do something more difficult or do something bigger than I've never done before if I've never done it? Right. So it's kind of this weird thing where we know we want to do more. We know we want to be happy. We know we want to surprise ourselves. We want to go farther. But if we've never done those things, like, how do we do it? It's kind of this weird mental conundrum. And at the end of the day, I think, for me anyway, when I'm going through anything difficult, a lot of times I get that self-doubt, which is like, hey, am I good enough? Or am I strong enough? Or am I, was I aiming a little bit too high? And so what we want to do here with resilience and learning how to be resilient is we just simply want to toughen up. We want to overcome obstacles. We want to kind of, in a way, kind of take the licks that might come our way. And then ultimately what will build up the resilience that we want so we can break through those upper limits to achieve the great things that we want to achieve for ourselves. So when we think about resilience versus obstacles as a kind of a backdrop here. So last episode, we talked about obstacles and how obstacles are a good thing and obstacles are something we need to plan for and prepare for and be of sound mind in order to deal with those obstacles. When I compare obstacles to resilience, at least for me, what I think about is resilience is dealing with obstacles over time, So it's learning to deal with different types of obstacles, and it's certainly a way to think about obstacles as they grow or they get bigger. So what I want to do is share a couple of examples, first from training and endurance races and those sorts of things, and then we'll dig into a couple of examples from the business world, places where maybe we don't yet have the resilience that we'd like to have, or opportunities for us to find ways to build more resilience. And then, of course, I'm going to wrap up with a couple of strategies. So resilience on the endurance trail, right? Resilience is kind of one of those things you have to learn how to do, right? In the last episode, I talked about this, my friend Carrie, who has this Carrieism that, no matter how good you feel or no matter how bad you feel during a race, it's never going to last. And so when you're doing long distance races, whether it's, long distance for some people could be a 10K, other people it's a half marathon, other people it's a full marathon. For me, it's doing ultra marathons, or before that, doing Ironman triathlons. And we know that the longer that a person, or the longer I know I'm out there on a trail or on a race course, the more likely it is that things are going to get hard, right? That's just the point of it. And so as you're training for these races, one of the things we're always looking for, my friends and I, when we're out there training, is looking for ways to build resilience, in the sense of, how do we create a little bit of a more difficult training run? How do we create a situation where things are a little bit tougher? And more importantly, is when we are having a difficult day on a training run, we're having a difficult day as we're preparing, we actually want to embrace that, because it's a chance for us to build resilience. One of the most recent examples for me is going back to last fall. So last fall, I ran a 100K trail run called the Lake Sonoma 100K. So 100K is about 62 miles. And in training for this race, it was the first ultra marathon that I had done in over 2 years. And while I'd stayed physically fit with some other things I'm doing with jujitsu and just general weight training and occasionally swimming and those sorts of things, I hadn't really done any running, right? So getting the running legs back up and working again, it kind of takes a while, right? You got to retrain yourself to climb up hills. You've got to figure out how does that feel? You got to figure out your pace again. You've got to figure out how to run on tired legs because your legs are going to get tired, even if you're well trained after 10 miles, 20 miles, 30 miles at some point, right? Your legs are just going to get tired. It's just physically going to happen. So you have to learn how to deal with running on tired legs. And I remember one of the most important or the most important training run I did in preparation for this race was a 25-mile run that I did with my friend Kelly. So Kelly and I have done many, many races over the years. He's done even more than I have. And he's paced me and I've paced him. And he's just been a good friend over the years that we've built this friendship around endurance races, first triathlon and now ultra running. And he had actually done this Lake Sonoma race in the past. And he was describing me the course and what it was like. And he was also training for a different race in the fall. I said, look, it would be good to go out and actually run some of that course. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So we drove out to Sonoma, drove out there the night before this Saturday morning run, I think it was a Sunday morning run. I drove out there, just camped out in my truck, slept in the back of the bed, and we decided we're going to get up at like 6 a.m. at daybreak and then do about 25 miles. So I have a chance to see the course. And for him, it's just another good training run. And so for me, I was really excited about this. I was like, man, this is going to be great. I've been training for a couple months. My legs feel good. I feel strong. I'm getting a chance to see the course. I'm going to get a real feel for what it's going to be like out here because I'm going to get to see a big chunk of what I'm going to be going through as I'm running this 100K. Not only that, Kelly has done this race before, so he can tell me in preview and we just talk for a few hours about the race and other stuff, other strategies. So I get up, I'm excited to go, I gear up, and the first couple miles is just nice little gentle downhill. And within 5 minutes, I was thinking to myself, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble today because the legs were just not working, even on the downhill. In fact, the downhill was a little bit more difficult because I didn't have this sort of spry feeling where you're kind of bouncing down a hill, avoiding rocks and roots, where you should be taking advantage of the downhill. I was actually feeling slow. My knees felt a little achy. And I was like, okay, it's going to be fine. Once I wake up a little bit, I just need to get a couple miles down the road, down the trail. And a couple miles came and went. I was still kind of feeling, kind of stiff and not nimble. I thought it's fine because now we're going to hit a little bit of up and down. I got a few miles down the road. I'll be fine. And like by mile 8 or 9, I'm still sluggish. I'm still dragging ass. And so I finally stopped and I was like, look, I got to take a break. And we're only like 2 hours into this run, less than 2 hours in this run. So I sit down, I take a break, I eat a little bit more food, trying to get my legs back and a couple more miles. And I just realized this was going to be one of those days. It was going to be a grind. I just couldn't get the motor running. I couldn't get my legs running. And then the sun came out, it started getting warmer, it started getting hotter. And these are all opportunities now. I'm thinking to myself, this is fine. I've been here before. I've had tired legs, and this is going to be really great practice for me because there's going to be a time in the race where I'm going to feel tired. I'm going to have tired legs. I'm going to feel like I'm grinding through and the wheels aren't going. For me in this training run, it happens to be at mile 8 or 9 or 10. In the race, it could be mile 30, 35, 40, 55. So the more I can get comfortable feeling this feeling, the better it's going to be for me in the race. Not only that, as the sun started coming up and it started feeling hot, again, I kind of welcomed this heat and thought, this is good. Because if on race day it's hot and I'm feeling tired and I feel like I have to grind, I will have experienced this exact same feeling on the exact same stretch of trail. So when we're doing these training runs, we're actually looking for opportunities to have bad days on the trail. We don't want to always have a great day. I love having great days, and I love, going out, and I've done 35-mile runs and 50-mile training runs, and I felt great the whole time. But sometimes when even a 5-mile run or a 10-mile run, or in this case, a 25-mile run, you get up and you're just feeling like you're grinding. And those are opportunities to build resilience. So another workout that I've done is what we call the 99 heart rate workout. So I learned this um, from a CrossFit expert. When I was training for Uberman years and years ago, my wife introduced me to this guy named Brian McKinsey. Brian McKinsey. So he's considered one of the initial developers of the idea of CrossFit endurance. So CrossFit is high reps and high heart rate and using weights and all these dynamic movements. What he did is he took CrossFit and adapted it to endurance racing. Like, how do you do CrossFit that's going to help you with your swimming, with your cycling, with your running as you're doing these kinds of endurance races? And I actually paid for a day to work with him one on one. I flew down to Southern California to his gym where he works and basically just spent like 6 hours with him doing a workout, planning out nutrition and workouts and schedules and everything else. And one of the workouts he gave to me is what he calls a 99 heart rate workout. Turns out this workout is one of the toughest workouts that I've done. The idea of the 99 heart rate workout is that you run about 600 yards or 600 meters, 600 to 800 meters, and you do full out sprint as hard as you can for 600 to 800 meters. And that sprint is designed to boost your heart rate as high as you can get it. And as soon as you finish that loop, that 600 meter or that 600 meter loop, then you stop and you wait for your heart rate to dip all the way back down to under 100 or to hit 99 on your heart rate meter. And as soon as that heart rate hits 99, you go again for another 600 meters. And you go as hard as you can to elevate your heart rate as high as you can go. And as soon as you get done, you stop, wait for your heart rate to dip down to 99 again. And this is just helping your body deal with how do you calm yourself down, but also how do you get a high heart rate, which busts through and gives you different metabolic conditioning, but also helps you figure out like how do I get my body to calm back down. And so I've done these workouts before where we're doing anywhere from 6 to 8 loops of these. And the effort that's required to do a 600 meter sprint is really difficult. Like 100 meters hard, 200 meters is hard. 600 meters to maintain that sprint pace for me, it's about 2 minutes. So you're going all out sprint for about 2 minutes. And then as soon as your heart rate drops to 99, you go again. And for me, those heart rate drops can take anywhere from a minute and a half to 3 minutes. So you're not resting for very long, but as soon as you start to calm down and you're starting to feel comfortable, you got to go again. So again, it's just another kind of workout that's just designed to be super hard. It's designed to be one of those ones where I'm going into, I'm like, I do not want to do this, but I will pick a hot day on purpose and run those 600 meters around a loop in my neighborhood purposely to help build that resilience. And the end result for these kinds of examples of training that will help build resilience is that when you get into these races, that you realize like, hey, it's okay. I can go farther. I can do more. If I'm in the garage doing workouts, for example, if I'm doing sets of box jumps, so common is to do a common workout, do 100 box jumps for time. So how quickly you do 100 box jumps? When I'm doing 100 box jumps for time, I do 105. Why do 105? Because I figure if I can do 100, I can do 105. And those five is 5% more. That's actually a lot, right? If I'm doing crunches, instead of doing a set of 50, I'll do a set of 51. It's 2% more. If I'm doing kettlebell swings, instead of doing sets of 25, I do sets of 31 because 31 is 31 miles, which is a 50K. So it's a nice round number for me. But it also says, look, if I can do 25, I can do 31. So if you do that over 4 sets, instead of 4 sets of 25, I'm doing 4 sets of 31. And then the last set, I'd actually do 32 because that brings me to 125 total reps instead of doing 100 total reps, which is 25% more than I normally would have done. So these incremental little pushes in workouts or dealing with days where you're not feeling good is what builds resilience so that when you get on the race course, you know how to deal with this concept of feeling tired, right? So I remember races where, like, for example, at Bryce Canyon, did a Bryce Canyon 100, and I've talked about this race. It's in the desert. I expected it to be hot. Turns out it was super cold, like 28 degrees at the race start. Throughout the day, it actually snowed. And I remember going around the second loop of this course, and I was around mile 78. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was way behind schedule on this second lap and just feeling dog tired. And I remember going up this little climb at like mile 78, wherever it was, 75, 76, 78, something like that. And I remember just sitting on the ground and then laying back on my back, spread out completely like a snow angel. I dropped my poles on the ground. I took off my backpack and just laid on the trail and stared up at the sky. I remember looking at the sky and looking at the stars and just thinking to myself, I am crapped out. I'm completely crapped out. But in that moment, it's like, well, what are you going to do? I'm in the middle of this trail, in the middle of Bryce Canyon at mile 78 at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, no one's coming to get you. No one's going to airlift you out of there. And so that's where you have to kind of go into the reserve tank and think, okay, like I know I can do more. I know I can get to the next aid station, which is like 3 or 4 miles down the trail. Doesn't matter how slow I go. I know I can pick myself and go farther. So let me just do that, get to that aid station, and then I'll be fine. And by the time I did get to the next aid station, while I was still feeling crappy, now the daylight's coming up. It's daybreak. It's a big aid station. I had a couple of different aid station people. They're like, hey, man, like you look a little rough. You good? You want to sit down? I got recovered. It took a long time. And that gave me the boost I needed to get through those last 20 miles. But it's just this concept of knowing I'd been in a tough spot before. The last example I'll give you is when I was the first time doing the Tahoe 200 race back in 2017. I had a pacer, a friend of mine named Sean, and this was, I don't know, probably must have been around mile 115 of the race, somewhere around there, maybe 120. I can't remember exactly when it was. And I was, been out there a couple days at this point. So I'd run 63 or so miles, slept for a bit, then run another 50 so miles, slept for a little bit. And so he was picking me up on what was my day 3. And again, just feeling dog tired. And I got to a point, we hit this, kind of patch where I said, dude, I need to take a nap. I need 10 minutes. So I found this giant boulder. I laid down on this boulder and I said, just give me 10 minutes. I'm just going to sleep for 10 minutes. And then once I'm asleep, wake me up and then we'll hit the trail again. He's like, okay, no problem. So I laid down on this boulder and I could just feel that I couldn't sleep. I was trying to sleep. I was trying to catch a nap, but a lot of the tailwind I drink has a lot of sugar, has caffeine. I remember, I was drinking coffee in the morning when I first got up. It's just really, really hard to sleep. So he comes over me and he kind of like kicks my leg and he said, okay, let's go. And I said, it hasn't been 10 minutes. Because I remember looking at my Garmin and looking at my watch. I remember I was like, it's only been like 6. And he said, you said you were going to nap. And you said, if you napped to give you 10 minutes, you're not asleep. Let's go. And I looked at him deadpan, like, are you serious? And he was dead serious. He's like, let's go. I was like, all right, let's go. And I realized like I didn't really need those 4 extra minutes. And I probably didn't even really need those 6 minutes. But I realized like it's fine. I can just keep going. And in fact, after I got up, I had a really good stretch where I just told myself, look, we're going to push a little harder. I'm going to bust through these tired feeling. And it was because I'd been through enough training to feel like, hey, I built up the resilience. My body's ready for this. I can do this. So, David Goggins, if you haven't run across him, maybe you have. So David Goggins he's written a couple of different books. And one of the things, the concepts that he talks about, you should check him out, by the way. He's crazy, crazy dude. Done super long distance races, way longer than I've done. And he talks about this concept of the cookie jar. And the cookie jar is when you do a workout or a training session or something really, really hard. He said those hard training sessions are for the cookie jar. And the cookie jar is there for when you're feeling down, when you're feeling tired, when you're feeling like you need a little more. He said what he does is he reaches into that cookie jar and he remembers, hey, I remember 2 months ago I was in this bad spot and I busted through this really hard training day. Or I was feeling really bad in another race and I powered through it and I got to the finish line. He said when you're feeling down, you're feeling tired, you have to reach into the cookie jar and remember the things that you've done that have pushed through it. And so those are opportunities when I do those workouts to remember when I'm doing a race, like, hey, this is a cookie jar. This is a cookie jar moment. I need to reach in the cookie jar. And when I'm doing a training run or some kind of workout, and it's a hard workout, sometimes I'll push myself harder to tell myself this is going to be one of those cookie jar workouts that I can remember down the road. All right, so let's talk about some areas of business, some business areas where we can maybe we find ourselves where we need to build some resilience. So a really simple one that for me, I understand how it might feel difficult to people. And it's an opportunity where maybe we fail to persist. And this is really kind of silly and stupid, but it's doing your prospecting. Like if you're running a business and you're the founder, especially if you're an early stage company or you're a salesperson or any kind of professional, that sales professional, right? You know, you've got to do some prospecting. You've got to do some outreach, whether you're prospecting for the initial meeting or you're prospecting, you're going out and trying to recruit salespeople, or you're prospecting for partnerships, or you're prospecting for the next round of capital that you need to raise. Sometimes the prospecting is one of those things that we push off. And we say like, I don't, yeah, I'll just do a few and then we get distracted. Or we're on LinkedIn and we send a few messages and then, you see a post and you get distracted. You start reading the post and you start doing other things. And all of a sudden you realize like, oh, I'm not doing the prospecting anymore. And, I talk about with our clients all the time, like do your 20, set your time aside, set aside a 60 or 90-minute prospecting block, do your 20, which is 20 unique touches to people that you know you need to reach out to. And what's interesting about this, like you set the time and you set the timer, and this is an easy way to start building resilience because the first couple of days or even the first couple of weeks that you're doing this, you'll find that it's kind of hard and clunky to hit your 20. You've got to figure out like who am I going to reach out to? And then you've got to figure out what's going to be my unique angle on this person. I've got to read their profile. I got to read their posts. I got to see what conferences they spoke at. I got to read about their company and figure out what they want to, well, what they might be most interested in related to what we do. And it's kind of a grind. It's kind of hard to get to your 20. You realize like, man, I spent like 60 minutes or 90 minutes and I only gotten 10 done or 12 done. And so this is a place where it's an opportunity where we might just kind of stop and we lose this opportunity to build resilience, right? So another example might be our inability to say no. So I've talked about before in a previous episode here about the importance of saying no and when you need to focus, when you need to get something done, whether that's in a day or something focused over a week or a month or a quarter or a year, how important it is to say no. And a lot of times we fall into this habit of saying yes to things for fear of missing out, or we feel like, oh, that one opportunity might be worth it. I'll go to that one conference, or I'll do that at one event, or I'll take that one call, or whatever the one thing is that we say we're going to do. And what ends up happening is we say yes to too many things when instead we should build the resilience to say no. It's kind of a muscle we need to build to learn how to say no, learn how to operate and effectively to say this doesn't fall into the thing at which I am focusing right now. So sometimes we kind of fail to say no, and then our calendar builds up, and then we get overwhelmed and we don't get everything done that we say we're going to get done, or the things we do, we don't do it to our maximal or optimal opportunity, right? So a third might be in a sales situation. We might fail to invite objections. It might sound crazy, like we're doing sales. We don't want objections. We're like, no, we want this person on the other side, this executive at a bank, or the C-level person over there. We want them to love our product. We want them to think it's the best thing. We want them to just move this thing quickly through decision and through procurement and through to a contract. Well, the reality is every single major sale is going to have some kind of objection, whether we know it or not. There's going to be objections that your prospects have that they're not going to tell you. I call them silent objections. And there's going to be some objections that they're going to just flat tell you, like, hey, we don't think this is going to work, or we have questions about this integration. And if we know those things exist, it's our responsibility to the prospect. It's our responsibility to ourselves and our company. It's our responsibility to the sales process to actually invite those objections, to introduce them in some way if we know that it's likely that this will be or is an objection. But what do? Sometimes we're just like, oh, things are going pretty well, and I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I don't want to screw anything up. So I don't want to screw anything up. I don't want to slow things down in the sale. So what do? We fail to invite those objections when it could be an opportunity for us to build that muscle, to build that resilience towards objections in the future, right? And the last thing is like, look, inviting the concept of like, we know there's going to be hard times in a business, and just sometimes the act of denial, like, oh, things aren't that bad. In previous episode, I talked about, sometimes you have to do the hard thing by letting somebody go that's not performing, or come to the realization like, man, I really screwed up. I hired a VP of sales that I should not have hired. I hired too soon. I hired the wrong person. I hired without setting the right expectations. And now I've got to deal with this. And sometimes we avoid that. We deny it. We kick the can down the road. We hope it's going to get better. So what do? We don't take the action. We don't take the opportunity to build the resilience around letting somebody go or having hard conversations. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that we all do this, right? It's human nature to be in our comfort zone. It's human nature to not want to introduce confrontation. We don't want to deal with the human factor of telling someone that we've got to let them go and that we've got 2 weeks and then they're only going to have 2 weeks of severance because that's what we can afford. But at the end of the day, we have to deal with these hard things. And when we deal with these hard things, it's an opportunity to build resilience. I remember one of the most important tips of running a business I got from my wife back in, it was probably around 2019. So I've been, running Sales Quality as a full-time business for about 3.5 years. And we were sitting down at dinner and I was just kind of like moaning about, I was like, God, like it seems like everything's hard right now. Like marketing, we're trying to do this marketing stuff. It doesn't seem to be working. We're in this little bit of a rut when it comes on to bring new clients. The clients we have, they're just not engaging. They're not getting results. And I hired these other coaches and I'm trying to get them on board. And it's like sometimes the cash flow is good in some months and other times it's not. I'm trying to figure out this. How do I deal with a cash flow model? How do I build contracts in a way that gets us cash up front, but also gets MRR? I was like, everything seems hard right now. And she looked at me and it was just like a little bit of a off the cuff statement. And yet it was something that is really rang true for me, where she said, look, all of this stuff is hard because you've solved all of the easy problems. The only problems left are the hard ones. It's like, wow, that's pretty deep. That's really meaningful. And it reminded me, and I remember that. And so I remind myself of those things whenever I'm dealing with hard stuff at work. It's me saying, look, I've kind of busted through the easy stuff. This thing is hard because I've cleared away the brush, I've cleared away the dust, I've cleared away the loose gravel. And what's in front of me now is this big boulder, this big granite boulder that I've got to figure out how am I going to work over it or around it or chip through it or find another pathway entirely. The good news is I've cleared away the easy things, and what's left are the hard things. And every time I come across that hard thing, it's an opportunity for me to learn something new, to figure out a new pathway, and again, to build resilience for the next new hard thing, the next new boulder that might be bigger than the one I'm facing right now. All right. So we've talked about resilience on the trail. We've talked about places in the business where maybe we fail to take opportunities to build resilience. Let's get into a couple strategies. I've got jotted on my notes here 5 strategies that I think will help you build resilience. And again, these are things that I do that have worked for me, that I've learned from other people. These are things that I've adopted and adapted for myself. So I'm sharing these in hopes that something here might be helpful for you. One last thing before we get into those strategies. At the top of this episode, I shared with you that I'm building, or I have built and putting the final touches on what I call the Go Farther journal, the Go Farther workbook. I absolutely want to get this out to you and anyone else that you think might benefit from having the opportunity to work on specific parts of this Go Farther journey that you're going on. And so as I built out this workbook, there's specific exercises and specific questions that you can journal on. So as an example, one of the questions that I've got in here is around the concept of how do we focus on now and worry about later. This is one of the previous episodes. And so the question I wrote in here as a page for you to journal on is, what is one area of my work or life where I'm letting anxiety or worry about the future affect my focus and performance on what I need to do today? If I could only accomplish one task today, what is that task and why is it important? So that's an example of one of the journal opportunities or one of the journal assignments that are in this workbook. It's a chance for us to just sit down by ourselves and reset, kind of uncover where we're feeling some resistance, where we need to focus more, where we can build resilience. So again, I've got the 97% of this thing is done and I want to release it in the next week or two. I'd like to get a jump start on getting the people like you that might be interested in getting a copy of this. So easiest thing to do is number one on LinkedIn. You can just, if we're already connected on LinkedIn, shoot me a DM that says Go Farther, or if we're not connected, send me a connection request. And all you have to do to personalize it, say Go Farther, because then I'll know that we've met because of this podcast. And lastly, you're welcome to shoot me an email, Scott, SCOTT, at scott@salesqualia.com, scott@salesqualia.com. In the subject line, you can just type in the words "go farther." And again, it'll just signal to me that that's how we met. And this is, you want to get your hands on the workbook when it's ready the next week or two. Okay. So let's wrap up here with a couple strategies that I think will help you build resilience. So some of the frameworks around resilience, I've mentioned that it's a topic that's studied robustly in psychology and by psychologists. And there's a little three-step process that are called the roots of resilience. Like, how can we start to build resilience? How can we nurture it? How can we grow resilience? And these three steps that have been defined are: number one, commitment; number two, control; and number three, challenge. So commitment, control, challenge. So how do we build resilience, or how do we start to develop to develop resilience? So number one is commitment. Number one is saying commitment means when we run up against an obstacle, when we run up against something that requires resilience, what we need to do is commit to it. We have to say to ourselves, like, hey, this is worth it. This is important enough that I need to figure this thing out. I need to work through this obstacle. I need to build this resilience muscle, because the outcome is important enough for me. It's important for the people around me. It's important for my customers, for my clients, for my team, for my family, for myself. It's important enough for me to work on this. So it has to be something we're willing to commit to. Number one. Number two, control. So this is where it's simply saying, I need to focus on my locus. I need to focus on those things that are in my locus of control. What do we have to work with? What can we do with what we have? One of my favorite movie scenes of all movie scenes is in the movie Apollo 13. So Apollo 13, Tom Hanks is in this movie, and it's about the astronauts that went up on Apollo 13 mission and got stuck because the spaceship broke down. And there's a scene where back on Earth in NASA, where they walk into the room, guy walks in the room, has a box of stuff, and he throws it on the table. And he's got a group of engineers around this table, and he says, we've got to get those guys up there, down here, with only this stuff. I'm paraphrasing the quote from the movie. And on the table, there's like some wires and some duct tape and some other like random materials. And what they did is they basically said they took inventory of what was available in this capsule to the guys up in Apollo 13. And they said, we've got to configure some way with just this stuff in order to get them from there down to here. And I think that's very appropriate when we're going through life or running a startup where we have limited tools and limited access. But if we just focus on what we do have, as opposed to what we don't have, those constraints are what can inspire creativity. And so that's the control piece. So number one, commitment; number two, control; and number three is challenge. And that is basically saying, like, look, no matter what the outcome is of this particular situation that I'm in, I'm either going to win, I'm going to figure this thing out, or I'm going to learn. I use this in my coaching program all the time. I tell clients, we're trying something new and you're trying to grow and you're going up and you're testing out a new strategy or a new system or a new skill. Two things are going to happen, and only two things. You're either going to win or you're going to learn. And so that challenge is we need to look at this as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to have a new experience, an opportunity to say, hey, when this thing is difficult, it's a good thing because we're encountering something hard. And this challenge is going to help make me stronger. So if you remember those kind of roots of resilience, what does it take to be resilient? Is this idea of number one, having commitment; number two, what's in my control; and number three, treat it as a challenge to overcome. So that's the first strategy. The second one is what's called the challenge model. The challenge model, which basically says that stressors within reason are a good thing. So you might be familiar with the concept of eustress. So there's stress and there's eustress, spelled EUSTRESS, eustress. So eustress is good stress. It's an amount of like just enough things that we're putting on our plate, on our day, on our week, on our life, or it's a good thing because it makes us stronger. Like, could be risk factors that we're dealing with, or it could be certain things that we need to balance. Like, oh, I've got to get ready for these client meetings. And I know in 2 days' time, I'm going to get in an airplane and go to this big conference where I'm speaking. And we're just starting a new customer implementation. All those things are going to happen in the next 5 days. Like, there's just enough like hard stuff in there over a short period of time where we know it's going to be hard. We know it's going to be difficult, but we know if we do the work that we know how to do and learn the things we need to learn, we're going to manage this. It's almost like, yeah, this is the challenge. I'm going to relish this. And by working through those hard things in that short period of time, that's what builds resilience. If you think about it physically, that's when you're doing weightlifting or weight training or doing any kind of running. When you lift weights, what you're actually doing is breaking down the muscle that exists. The muscle tissue actually breaks and then it rebuilds a little bit stronger. That's what soreness is. When you're sore after lifting weights or doing push-ups or doing sit-ups, that soreness is your body rebuilding itself, right? Those little challenges as well build confidence. When you lift a little more weight, or you're training for that 10K, or you're training for that half marathon, and you get through that half marathon, that little challenge, you realize like I just ran 13.1 miles and I finished the race. And if I really, really had to, I probably could run another 2 or 3 miles. You start to realize like, oh, that challenge just helped me realize like I could go a little bit farther. So those stressors that we're doing are actually good things within reason. So think about how and this is where focusing on, like focus on now, worry about later, scheduling things, mapping things out, knowing exactly what you can handle and what things you need to delay or move off your plate are really critical. But looking at the opportunity for you stress, looking for the opportunity to take in those risk factors and say, this is good. I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to build from this, and then it's going to help me be better. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is using regret as a motivator. So what I do as a way to use regret as a motivator is I say to myself, I don't want to regret not doing a little bit more when I know I'm capable of doing it, right? I don't want to regret not getting something done that, maybe I could have gotten it done, maybe I couldn't have got it done, but I don't ever want to feel a sense of regret that I didn't do as much as possible. So I remember at the beginning of this soccer season, I coached my son's soccer team, and we were in our first tournament this year back in the fall, early fall. It was actually summer, it was in August. And second game of the tournament, we were down 5-1 at halftime, 5-1. So that's not a good situation to be in when you're down 5-1. And we played 25-minute halves, I think, or 30-minute halves in that tournament. So you don't have a lot of time. And the team was just not playing well. I could just tell that for whatever reason, they weren't coordinated, they weren't talking, nobody was really doing their job. And so I pulled them aside at halftime and I said, look, guys, like you have a choice here. You can choose to go out and just play out the second half and lose this game, or you can go out and play hard and see if you can get a goal or get a second goal or get a third goal. Because I've played in enough tournaments, and I said, Coach Jose, who's my assistant coach, he's done this long enough. We both know the last thing you want to do is go home tonight and feel like, man, I wish I would have tried a little harder in that game. Because you're going to have to sit with that. You're going to have to remember that. You're going to have to deal with those feelings. And I think the halftime speech worked because within the first 2 minutes of the second half, we scored a goal. And then a minute later, we scored another goal. And a couple minutes later, we scored a third goal. We ended up winning this game 8-5. It was like an avalanche. These kids just pulled it together. And once they scored that first goal, their confidence raised and they scored the second. And then you can start to see the other team back in their heels. And it was just pure domination. And it was just that little speech around like, hey, you don't want to go home tonight and feel like, man, I wish I would have played a little harder or tried a little harder. I wish I wouldn't have given up just because we were down 5-1. So I use this little tactic. I use it all the time when I'm training. If I'm swimming, for example, I just did this yesterday, I was doing a timed workout where I was doing 500 meters and I was doing it for time. And I set a little goal for myself going into those 500 yards. I might tell myself like, look, this 500 yards, I want to finish definitely under 8 minutes. If I push really hard, I want to finish under 7 minutes and 50 seconds or 7 minutes and 45 seconds. And so what I'll do is as I'm going through each lap, I'll slowly start to increase the pace because I know I can handle a little bit more, And those last couple of laps, I will tell myself, push harder. You can push a little bit harder because you don't want to regret getting to the wall, looking at the clock, and it says 7:51. That 1 second, you're like, I knew I could have pushed a little harder. And it's just a little mind game that I play with myself. And it works a lot of times where I realize like, man, okay, I'm glad I pushed because it came in at 7:50 or 7:49. And maybe I didn't. Maybe it still says 752, but at least then I know I pushed as hard as I could. Right. So you just want to go through that what if scenario. And says like, what if I get to the end and I feel like I could have done a little more and I didn't? It could be just enough of a motivator to do, if you did doing your prospecting, you did your 20, you blocked out 90 minutes and then you're done your 20 and 75 minutes. You could say, I'm done. Or you could say like, hey, why don't I take 15 minutes and see if I can do another three or another five? Can I get to 25 today? Right. What can I do to push a little bit more and feel like, I wish I would have spent the extra 15 minutes prospecting instead of taking a break early. It's just a little trick in your mind to say, I don't put yourself in that future place and imagine what it will feel like to feel regret and say to myself, I don't want that feeling. So even if I don't get to where I want to go, at least I know I've put in all the effort. So that's my fourth strategy. And then the last one that I'll share with you is simply looking backwards. Looking backwards, when you want to build resilience or you feel like you need to build resilience, one of the most important things we can do is look backwards over time and realize that we have done hard things. We have done things every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year that have gotten us to this point in our life. And those hard things might be around the business, yourself. Like maybe you're trying to raise capital right now, you're trying to close a Series A, and you realize like, man, this is really hard. Well, look back and say, well, I've closed a seed round before, and I've closed an angel round before. Like I've done this before when the company was less developed, with less product, fewer customers, less revenue. And I know if I just keep going, I know I've got a good story. I know I've got a good company. I know if I just find that one right investor that's looking for this opportunity that we are presenting to them, then I know it's going to be okay. Right. So look backwards over time. The same, I do this all the time that's what the cookie jar workout is about. It's just looking back and saying like, hey, I've worked hard. I've put in the time. I've put in the effort. I did the extra box jumps. I did the extra weights. I did the extra miles. I did the extra laps. Right. There's a really good exercise. There's a guy named Dan Sullivan that's done coaching for years. I was part of his program a couple of years ago, and he has this exercise called the confidence builder. And I still do this every day as part of my daily journaling. I look back at yesterday and I say, what are 5 things that I've done that are little achievements? And they don't have to be huge achievements. Sometimes they are like, oh, we brought on a new client, or we helped this client achieve a certain result, or I did this mega workout that really busted through an upper limit for me. And sometimes they're big things, but sometimes they're small things. Like, hey, I kept to my diet yesterday because, we went out to dinner and a bunch of friends were having pizza and I decided to have the salad. That's an achievement. You're like, no, I stayed on my nutrition plan, right? Or yesterday I did really well because I got to bed before 9 o'clock and I got to sleep so I could get a full 7 hours before the alarm goes off at 4 a.m. Could be a small thing. And by doing that every day, the idea that Dan Sullivan says, it just helps build that daily routine of building confidence, building confidence, building confidence, realizing that you've done things every single day that's making you better, making you stronger, making you more resilient. So that's it. Lots of notes. Like I said, I spent a lot of time yesterday thinking about this. It's an important topic. It's one I use all the time when I'm training. I use it all the time when I'm running business. So that's my share with you today in this episode of Resilience. Be resilient. Hopefully some of the strategies will help you to do more, be happy, surprise yourself, go farther.